Daniel had 2 children, a mansion and a failing heart, and on the night that mattered most, only one of them answered the phone. The cardiologist's office smelled like antiseptic and quiet dread. Daniel Mercer sat in a chair that was slightly too stiff to be comfortable, wearing his best button-down shirt, the navy blue one Margaret had bought him 7 years ago for their anniversary, because he had always believed you should dress well for important meetings, even when the meeting was about your own mortality. Dr. Patricia Ackefer slid the manila folder across her desk with the careful precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times and never quite gotten used to it. She was a small woman with warm brown eyes and reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, and she looked at Daniel the way good doctors look at patients. They genuinely wish they could get better news too. "Mr. Mercer," she said, folding her hands together, "I want to be direct with you because I think you're the kind of man who appreciates directness." Daniel was 67 years old. He had spent 31 of those years driving a school bus. First in the district where his children grew up, and then, after Margaret died, in a different district, where nobody knew his name or his grief. His hands were rough and his back ached every morning, and he had the kind of face that had earned its wrinkles honestly. One hard winter at a time, he nodded at Dr. Ackefer and said, "Go ahead." She told him about his heart valve. She used words like severe aortic stenosis and significant deterioration and intervention window, and Daniel listened carefully, the way he had always listened to things that scared him, very still, very quiet, taking it all in. The valve that controlled blood flow from his heart was narrowing. It had been narrowing for a while. He had ignored the fatigue and the occasional dizziness because he was 67 and thought that was simply what 67 felt like. It was not simply what 67 felt like. "The procedure we're recommending is called a TAVR," Dr. Ackefer explained. "Transcatheter aortic valve replacement. It's minimally invasive, and your overall health profile makes you a good candidate. But we need to move on this within the next few months, Daniel. If we wait too long, the window for this procedure closes, and we're looking at open-heart surgery with considerably more risk, or we're looking at a situation where surgical intervention is no longer viable at all." "How much?" Daniel asked, because he had always been the kind of man who went straight to the practical question. Dr. Ackefer glanced at her notes. "With your current insurance coverage, you're out of pocket. Portion would be approximately $4,200. Your insurance will cover the bulk of it, but the $4,200 needs to be handled before we can schedule." $4,200. Daniel Mercer had worked for 31 years and had almost nothing to show for it in the way of savings. Margaret's illness had taken most of it, the good years, the accumulation years. And what the illness hadn't taken, the funeral had, and what the funeral hadn't taken, the years of quiet, isolated grief had whittled away in the form of a small apartment, simple food, and the occasional extravagance of a fishing trip that he always told himself he deserved. He did not have $4,200, but he had 2 children. He drove home that evening through streets that looked exactly the same as they always had. And he sat in the parking lot of his apartment building for 20 minutes before going inside, watching the ordinary world move around him. A woman walking a golden retriever, a teenager on a bicycle, a couple arguing cheerfully about where to go for dinner, and he thought about his son, and he thought about his daughter, and he breathed slowly and carefully, because Dr. Ackefer had told him to take his breathing seriously. Then he went inside and made the calls. Marcus Mercer was 41 years old and successful in the way that certain men become successful, loudly, visibly, in ways that required other people to notice. He had built a software company in his late 20s that had been acquired for a sum he never disclosed precisely but always managed to reference obliquely in conversation, and he had since pivoted into consulting and venture capital, and a lifestyle that involved a house in a gated community outside Atlanta, a vacation property in Costa Rica, 2 luxury vehicles, and a subscription to a private members club that cost more per year than Daniel made in 4 months. Marcus had not always been this way. Daniel remembered a boy who cried at the end of movies, who brought home stray animals, who had once spent 3 weeks of his own allowance to buy a birthday present for a classmate whose parents couldn't afford to throw party. That boy had existed. Daniel had raised him and loved him and watched him grow. Somewhere in the distance between that boy and this man, something had shifted. Daniel couldn't identify the exact moment. It had been gradual, the way most losses are, not a single breaking point but an accumulation of small surrenders, small choices, small revisions to the self. Until one day, you look at the person and realize they have become someone you recognize only in outline. Daniel called his son on a Tuesday evening. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was the voice of a man conducting 3 things simultaneously. Daniel could hear keyboard clicks, could hear a television murmuring in the background, could hear the clipped efficiency of a person for whom phone calls were transactions to be completed rather than conversations to be had. "Dad, hey, what's up?" Daniel told him. He told him clearly and without drama, in the same direct voice he had always used, the voice of a man who respected his children enough not to manipulate them. He explained the valve, the procedure, the timeline, the cost. He explained that he was not calling to alarm Marcus, but that he needed help, and that he thought $4,200, given Marcus's circumstances, was something that could be managed. There was a pause on the other end, a long one. "Dad," Marcus said, and his tone had changed. It was now the tone of someone preparing to explain something obvious to someone slow. "You know, I'm not really liquid right now." Daniel said nothing. "I mean, I've got money, obviously, but it's all tied up. I've got 3 deals in various stages right now, and cash flow it's more complicated than it looks from the outside, okay? People see the house and the cars and they think." "Marcus," Daniel said quietly, "I'm not asking you to explain your finances to me. I'm asking for $4,200 so I can have a heart procedure." Another pause. "Have you looked into payment plans? Most hospitals have financing options. Now, you could probably get them to work with you on a monthly basis. That might actually make more sense for your situation." Your situation. As if Daniel's situation were a business problem to be restructured rather than life to be saved. "The insurance requires the out-of-pocket before scheduling," Daniel said. He had already looked into payment plans. He had already called the hospital's billing department. He had already exhausted the obvious options before picking up the phone, because he was a man who did not ask for help easily or prematurely. "Right," Marcus said. Right, more keyboard clicking. "Listen, Dad, let me think about it." "Okay, let me see what I can do. I'll call you back this week." Marcus did not call back that week. Daniel called him again 8 days later. The call went to voicemail. He left a measured, non-accusatory message explaining that he wanted to discuss the medical situation and that he hoped they could talk soon. Marcus texted back 2 hours later, "Really swamped right now, looking into some options. Will call soon." He did not call soon. 3 weeks passed. Daniel went to a follow-up appointment with Dr. Akefer, who gently emphasized the importance of the timeline. He took his medications and watched his diet and walked carefully and measured his life in smaller increments than he had before, not decades anymore, not years, but months, weeks, the particular quality of a Tuesday afternoon in October, when the light came through his apartment window at a slant that reminded him, somehow, of the house where his children had grown up. He tried Marcus one more time. It was a Sunday morning, and Marcus answered from what sounded like a restaurant brunch. Daniel could hear laughter and the clink of glassware and a jazz standard playing softly underneath, the ambient noise of comfortable wealth. "Dad, sorry I've been so hard to reach. Things have been insane." Daniel asked about the money. The silence this time was different. It was not the silence of consideration. It was the silence of a decision already made, a door already closed, now being dressed up in the language of regret. I can't do it right now, Dad. I'm sorry. I genuinely am, but the timing is terrible and 4,200 isn't, it's not nothing, and everything is just so complicated right now, and I feel like the hospital really should be able to work with you on financing. And okay, Marcus, Daniel said. Dad, I really am. Okay, son, Daniel said again gently and ended the call. He sat in his apartment for a while after that, not crying. He was not a man who cried often, just sitting with the particular stillness of someone absorbing a thing they had hoped they wouldn't have to absorb, integrating it quietly into their understanding of the world. Then he called his daughter Sophie Mercer Rockefeller. She had kept her married name even after the divorce because her daughter carried that name, and she refused to create any distance between them. Was 38 years old and living in a one-bedroom apartment in Cleveland with her 9-year-old daughter Lily and a gray tabby cat named Professor. She worked as a medical billing specialist, which had a certain cruel irony given the circumstances, because she understood exactly what her father's diagnosis meant and exactly what that $4,200 threshold represented, and exactly what happened when people in her father's position couldn't clear it. She had processed paperwork for people in that situation. She knew how those stories ended. Sophie's life had not gone according to any plan she had made. Her marriage to Kevin Rockefeller had been good for 8 years, and then had stopped being good in the slow, terrible way that marriages stop being good, not in a single catastrophic event, but in the steady erosion of two people who had wanted the same things and had then gradually wanted entirely different things. The divorce had been civil and sad, and had left Sophie with her daughter, her cat, her apartment, and her job, and a savings account that she had been building slowly and carefully for 2 years toward a goal she kept written on a sticky note on her refrigerator: emergency fund $1,500. She had $1,147 in that account when her father called. She was in the middle of giving Lily a bath when her phone rang. She had it propped on the bathroom counter because Lily was at an age where bath time required supervision, but also negotiation and occasional reading aloud, and she saw her father's name on the screen and said, "Give me 1 minute, bug," and stepped into the hallway. Daniel told her everything. Unlike Marcus, Sophie did not listen with keyboard clicks in the background. She leaned against the hallway wall and listened with her whole self, the way she had always listened to her father, fully, with the particular attention of someone who understood that this man did not call with problems unless the problems were real. When he finished, she said, "How long have you known?" "About a month." "Dad," there was love in the word and gentle exasperation, and something else, the particular ache of a child realizing their parent has been carrying something alone. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" "I was trying to work it out," he said. "I called Marcus first." A pause, and he wasn't able to help. Sophie understood from those 4 words everything that had happened. She had a complex relationship with the truth of who her brother had become. She loved him in the obligatory foundational way of siblings, loved the memory of him more clearly than the reality, and had long since made her peace with the fact that Marcus was most generous with people he needed. Something from, and least generous with people who simply needed him. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Dad, let me figure this out." "Sophie," his voice was careful, "I'm not asking you to. I know your situation. I just wanted you to know what was happening." "I know you're not asking," she said. "I'm telling. Let me figure it out. Give me a couple of days." She went back into the bathroom where Lily was creating an elaborate civilization out of shampoo bottle architecture, and she finished bath time and read 2 chapters of the book they were working through together, and turned off the light and sat in the dark of Lily's room for a while after her daughter fell asleep. She looked at her bank account on her phone, $1,147. She thought about what that money was supposed to be for, the emergencies she couldn't predict, the car repair, the medical bill, the month where the work hours got cut. She thought about the sticky note on her refrigerator. She thought about the fact that she was $353 away from her goal and had been working toward it for 2 years. She thought about her father at the wheel of a school bus at 6 in the morning in February, in the cold and the dark, for 31 years, so that she and Marcus could have lunch money and school clothes and birthday cakes, and the particular security of knowing that whatever else happened, someone who loved them unconditionally was at the wheel. She didn't think about it very long. In the morning, she called her father. "I have $1,100, she said. "It's not enough for the whole thing, but it's what I have, and I want you to have it. We'll figure out the rest." Daniel's silence was different from any silence she had heard from him before. It was full in a way she couldn't quite describe, full and heavy and tender all at once. "Sophie," he said, "that's your emergency fund." "Dad," she said, "you are my emergency." Part 4. What happened next? She wired the money that afternoon. It took 45 minutes and cost her $8 in transfer fees, which she paid without hesitation. The $1,100 was not enough for the full $4,200. Daniel knew that. Sophie knew that. But what it was a beginning. It was a daughter refusing to let her father disappear quietly from the world because the world required paperwork and payment before it would agree to keep him in it. Daniel went back to Dr. Akeffer's office with Sophie's $1,100 and had an honest conversation with the billing department about what he had and what he needed. The hospital had a financial assistance program, a real one, not the vague financing suggestion Marcus had offered from behind the ambient noise of a restaurant brunch, and the billing coordinator, a woman named Teresa, who wore bright yellow nail polish and spoke with the efficient compassion of someone who navigated these conversations daily, walked Daniel through an application with Sophie's $1,100 as a demonstrated good faith contribution and his fixed income documentation. Daniel qualified for a charitable care adjustment that reduced his remaining balance to $800, which the hospital agreed to take in installments of $100 per month. He was scheduled for the procedure 6 weeks later. Sophie drove from Cleveland to where her father lived. It was a 9-hour drive. She arranged for Lily to stay with her best friend and her family, took 2 days off work, and drove through Ohio and Pennsylvania and into the state where Daniel lived, arriving at his apartment the night before the procedure with a casserole in a carrier bag and Professor the cat's travel carrier conspicuously absent, because she had correctly calculated that what her father needed was her presence and not the added chaos of a nervous feline. They ate the casserole at his small kitchen table and talked for hours, not about the procedure, not about money, not about Marcus, though he was present in the room in the particular way. that absent people are when they should have been there. They talked about Margaret, about Daniel's wife and Sophie's mother, dead 11 years now, a loss they had processed. Separately and together and separately again across the decade. They talked about Lily, about the elaborate shampoo bottle civilization, and the book they were reading and the way Lily had her grandmother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness. They talked about a fishing trip Daniel had taken 3 summers ago to a lake in the north of the state where he had caught nothing for 3 days and had been completely, perfectly at peace. Sophie slept on Daniel's couch. In the morning, she drove him to the hospital and sat in the waiting room for 4 hours with a terrible cup of coffee and a paperback novel she couldn't concentrate on, reading the same page 11 times while the fluorescent lights hummed above her, and the procedural world of the hospital moved around her in its complicated, necessary rhythms. Dr. Ackerfer came out at the 2-hour mark to say things were going well. She came out at the 4-hour mark to say it was done. Daniel Mercer's heart, supported now by a new valve, a small, precise, engineered thing that would keep blood moving through him for years, beat steadily in his chest as he came out. Anesthesia, and found his daughter's face, the first thing his clearing eyes settled on. "Hey, Dad," Sophie said. "Hey, kid," Daniel said, his voice rough with the tail end of sedation. He looked at her for a long moment. "You drove 9 hours. 8.5, she said. "The construction on 76 was lighter than I expected." He reached for her hand, and she gave it to him, and they sat together in the recovery room, while the monitors beeped, and the afternoon light came through the Venetian blinds in narrow stripes, and Daniel thought about what it meant to be loved in the particular way that Sophie loved him, not the love of plenty, not the love that costs nothing because there is so much to spare, but the love that gives what it cannot afford to lose, the love that identifies someone as worth more than any amount of careful, practical self-protection. The conversation that happened 6 weeks later. Marcus called when he heard. Daniel wasn't sure exactly how Marcus heard. Perhaps Sophie had told him. Perhaps Marcus had finally gotten around to checking in. Perhaps some familial instinct had eventually fired in the direction of the father he had declined to save. "Dad," Marcus said, "I heard about the procedure. I'm so glad you're okay. I've been so worried." Daniel, who was sitting in his armchair with a cup of tea and a library book and a new valve doing its quiet work in his chest, considered what to say to this. He was not an angry man. He had never had much use for sustained anger, had found. Across the years, that anger required a kind of energy that he preferred to spend on other things. He did not want to wound his son. He did not want to deliver a speech. He was 67 years old and alive, and his daughter had driven 9 hours and given him her last $1,100, and he was sitting in his armchair on a November afternoon feeling the strange specific gift of being present in the world. "I'm all right, Marcus," he said. "Feel terrible," Marcus said, "about the money situation. The timing was just, and I've been meaning to send you something to help with. I know Sophie stepped up, and I appreciate that she did, but I'd like to contribute, help cover what she—" "Marcus," Daniel said. "Yeah. You don't need to do that." A pause. "I want to make it right, Dad." "The thing is," Daniel said, in the careful, steady way he had of saying things he had thought about for a long time, "I'm not sure it works that way, making it right. I don't mean that as a punishment. I'm not saying you're a bad person or that I don't love you. I do love you, but when your sister gave me that money, she didn't have it to give. You had what I needed and decided not to give it. Those aren't the same situation, and sending money now, it doesn't go back and change what that was." Marcus was quiet. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," Daniel continued. "I'm telling you because I think you might need to hear it, not about the money. about what kind of person you want to be, because I know who you were, Marcus. I raised you, and I'm not sure that person would recognize the person who let his father's heart problem become a cash flow discussion. The silence stretched between them across the miles, and Daniel let it stretch. I think, Marcus finally said, and his voice had lost its practiced quality and had become something rougher and younger, something that reminded Daniel faintly of the boy who had cried at the end of movies. I think I've gotten very good at convincing myself that success makes certain things okay. I know, Daniel said gently. Does Sophie hate me? Sophie doesn't hate anyone. She gets tired of people, but she doesn't hate them. A sound from Marcus that might have been the beginning of a laugh, and settled for something smaller. I should call her. You should, Daniel agreed. And when you do, don't make it about explaining yourself. Just call to say you love her and to ask how Lily's doing and to listen to whatever she tells you. That's all. Okay, Marcus said. He sounded young. He sounded like someone standing at the beginning of a long road back towards someone they had stopped being. Okay, Dad, I will. They talked for a while longer, careful, tentative talk. The talk of two people finding the edges of a newly altered relationship, mapping its new dimensions. When they hung up, Daniel sat in the quiet of his apartment and finished his tea and thought about his children. He thought about what love looked like when it was tested, the difference between love as an emotion and love as an action, love as a feeling you carry, and love as a thing you do when it costs you something. He thought about Sophie at 23 making breakfast for him after Margaret's funeral because the church ladies had run out of casseroles, and someone needed to feed the people in the house. He thought about Sophie at 30, driving through a blizzard to get to him when he had that bad flu the winter after he retired. He thought about Sophie at 38, standing in her hallway outside Lily's bathroom, looking at her bank balance on her phone, making a decision. He thought about what it meant to be a parent, not the glory of it, not the pride, but the specific responsibility of it. You create these people, you raise them, you send them into the world as best you can, and then you watch who they become, and sometimes who they become surprises you in the best possible way. And sometimes it surprises you in ways that require a long night sitting with difficult truths. Both things were true about his children. He held both things. He loved them in the specific, irreducible way that parents love children, completely, without condition and with a full accounting of who they actually were. The November afternoon that found Daniel Mercer alive and well, sitting in the stands of a middle school gymnasium in Cleveland, watching his granddaughter Lily compete in the regional spelling championship, was one of those afternoons that seemed to understand its own significance. The light was good. The gymnasium smelled like wood polish and gymnasium shoes, and Lily was wearing a blue sweater with a small embroidered star on the pocket that Sophie had sewn on herself because Lily had asked for it. Lily made it to the final round. She went out on the word ecclesiastical, which she spelled with 2 S's in the middle instead of 1, and she came off the stage with her chin up and her eyes bright and said, "I knew it the second I said the second S," and Daniel laughed and pulled her close and told her that ecclesiastical was a word that had humbled better spellers than her, which was almost certainly true. Sophie brought sandwiches. They ate in the car in the parking lot because it was cold outside, and the gymnasium was already being folded back into its ordinary purpose, the chairs being stacked and the banners being rolled, and the afternoon reassembling itself around the daily fact of a middle school. "How's your heart?" Sophie asked. She always asked, and she always asked it practically, without the anxious weight that some people attach to the question. "Good," Daniel said. "Dr. Acaffer says the numbers look excellent." "Good," Sophie said, and handed him a sandwich. Lily was in the backseat telling them about a mistake a different kid had made in the third round. Not meanly, just with the detailed accuracy of a child who had paid close attention to everything. And Professor the cat, who had come along because Lily had insisted and Sophie had eventually agreed, was in his carrier making the small periodic complaint of a cat who feels. His presence in an automobile has not been adequately explained to him. Marcus had called Sophie. She had told Daniel this matter-of-factly about 3 weeks after the conversation Daniel had with his son. The call had been what Daniel had prescribed. No explanations, just love and questions and listening. She had told Daniel it was a start. She was not the kind of person who demanded more than a start before she was willing to see where something went. Daniel ate his sandwich and watched the parking lot empty slowly around them and listened to his granddaughter's voice and his daughter's voice and the periodic complaints of a gray tabby cat, and felt the new valve in his chest doing its precise and faithful work, and thought that this specific concatenation of small, ordinary, unremarkable things was everything, not the procedure, not the money, not the $4,200 or the $1,100 or the complicated arithmetic of who had given what and who had refused. Those were the facts of the situation, but the situation was not the point. The point was this parking lot, this sandwich, this granddaughter who had gone out on ecclesiastical with her chin up and her eyes clear. The point was that Sophie Mercer Rockefeller, who had $1,147 in a carefully accumulated emergency fund that was $353 short of where she wanted it to be, had looked at that number and looked at her father's situation and had made the immediate and unambiguous calculation that he was worth more than any amount she had. The point was that she had been right. Epilogue. Lily Rockefeller won the regional spelling championship the following year. The word she won on was conscientious, which she had practiced on flashcards with her grandfather every Saturday morning for 6 months, the two of them sitting at Daniel's kitchen table with tea and flashcards, while the morning accumulated outside his window. When she held up her trophy and found his face in the stands, she grinned, and it was Margaret's grin, Margaret's eyes, the specific bright particular aliveness of a woman who had been gone 11 years and was still, somehow, impossibly everywhere. Daniel Mercer stood up and clapped until his hands hurt. His heart beat steadily, faithfully, without interruption. He had 2 children and a new valve, and a granddaughter who could spell conscientious, and a daughter who had given him her last $1,100 without a moment's hesitation. He had, he thought, exactly the right things. The end.